All right, so we're recording. All right, you ready to go?
I am ready to go.
All right. So, Paul, how's retirement?
Well, I can't say that I've actually been able to enjoy retirement. It's been probably busier than I've ever been in my life after the press conference announcing Joe D'Angelo as the Golden State Killer. But it's been all good. I'm enjoying every minute of it. It's a little stressful in terms of trying to figure out, what the next phase of my life is. But, I'm going to take advantage of the opportunity.
And you're certainly not laying back and sleeping in and relaxing. You're out there actually on the go, it seems like.
No, I wish I were. No. There's a lot of media attention on the case, and so every day I've got 10 to 15 calls coming in from the media asking for, either prolonged interviews or short 5-minute hits, as they call it in the industry. It's a lingo that I'm quickly learning. But I also have law enforcement agencies hitting me up asking for help on their cases, and I actually prioritize them. I want to make sure that if they have cases that could benefit from the technology that we use to catch the Golden State Killer, I want to pass that knowledge base on.
That's awesome. And, I had wanted to do this interview with you at CrimeCon, but you were, super busy there. What was that whole experience like for you?
Yeah, I had no idea what I was walking into at CrimeCon. I had registered for CrimeCon about a month prior to the date that it started, and that was at the urging of Jane Carson and Debbie Domingo. We had been out in New York for the Megyn Kelly show, and at dinner one night they said, you should go. They were going to have a booth. They wanted some support on the panel, and I agreed. Okay, that seemed like a good thing. I wasn't sure I'd be able to afford it, but I would look into it. And then coming back and looking at it, I thought, for retirement purposes and just going out there to possibly, start a consulting business, to help both law enforcement and the media out, it would be a good business opportunity. So I went ahead and bit the bullet and decided to pay my own way out there. And I went out there, as we're leading up and ultimately Joe D'Angelo was taken into custody, I didn't think I was going to be out there. I thought this is going to bleed over. I'm going to have to cancel going out to CrimeCon. But then we had the press conference and everything kind of settled down for me on the investigation side. So I went ahead and got out to Nashville and did not expect the type of reception, the amount of recognition that I was getting, which was very overwhelming. It was very humbling. It was such a nice feeling to have so many people just genuinely feel happy about what had happened within the last few days.
Yeah, and it was funny because you and I had actually talked before CrimeCon, and when you were talking about going, and I think you're trying to keep it on the down low at that point. And I was thinking,
right.
Yeah, that's going to last about 2 minutes. Once you get there and somebody sees you there, that's going to be all over the internet. And I think that's what must have happened.
Yeah. And I know from my perspective, I was completely oblivious to how many people had actually watched some of these shows that had interviewed me for the Golden State Killer series. So, for me, I was just a guy that, had lived my entire life sort of, being in the shadows, never being out there really in the public eye. And to show up at the hotel and have people who I had never met before in my life just recognize me, I've never experienced that. I never expected to experience that. But it was really a neat experience at the same time.
Yeah, and I think you're by far the most popular person there. I tried to talk to you a few times, and I was like, whoa, he's got a whole posse of people over there that are forming himself, and try and step back and let him do his thing. But you were running ragged. I talked to you a couple times, and you seemed like you were pretty tired.
I was tired. It was exhausting. I was staying at a different hotel off site, Ubering back and forth. Early mornings, late nights. But it was all good. I enjoyed meeting all those people. I appreciated the sincerity of their gratitude for the work that I had done on the case. And I think a lot of ways it was really for me to get that attention. It just happened to be the stars aligned. TV shows had come out on the case. Michelle McNamara's book had come out in the case within the last month or 2 months, and then we go and announce and solve the case, and then 2 days later or 3 days later, I'm out in Nashville. So it was just this weird snowball effect. And so everybody there was aware of the Golden State Killer and was aware of who I was just because of the TV shows and Michelle McNamara's book.
And did you, obviously you're there, you're surprised by everything that happened, but, I'm sure most everybody was fine and friendly and normal. Did you have any scares or any real funny stories that happened to you while you were there?
No, everybody that I talked to, that I met, they were very nice. They were so thankful for my role in the Golden State Killer case. I had no issues with anybody that approached me, either asking, to take a photo with me or came up and just wanted to ask certain questions, or even, doing things like signing the book, the Michelle McNamara's book, or signing their T-shirt or signing their CrimeCon placard. So that all was great. There was no issues whatsoever. Everybody there was really nice.
Yeah, and everybody was posting all their pictures with you and their cool stories about you. And I have a funny story I want to tell. This is just a little personal one I had. So, I'm out at dinner. We're at this outdoor pizza place. We're with some friends and Debbie and Margaret and Michelle and Wes and a bunch of people. I go up to grab a slice of pizza and a beer, and I come back, and you're sitting in my seat. My wife is like completely didn't even say my husband's there sitting there. And he's like, oh. I'm just like kicked to the curb as soon as you sit down at the table. So,
no.
My funny experience with you, but it was cool to sit down and talk with you and just hear your side of things in a casual environment like that. So I thought that was pretty neat.
No, I absolutely enjoyed that little dinner conversation we had, and then talking with the other people at the table. That was great.
Yeah, it was a nice little time, and I think hopefully you got to relax other times other than that, because when I saw you weren't relaxing. You were pretty busy. So
I would say there really wasn't a whole heck of a lot of relaxing going on at that time.
Yeah. Well, let's get down to brass tacks.
Yep.
We interviewed you back in I think it was January or February, I can't remember now, but you were 10 weeks away from retiring, you told us. And we talked a lot of stuff with you. We went over DNA, and you really broke down a lot of DNA stuff. And you literally told us that you were shaking the trees. And looking back, I'm thinking, did he just throw a big clue that went right over my head that I just
did? Yep.
You're like, I'm shaking Absolutely. The trees. Pissing a lot of people off. But, come to find out, you are shaking the trees. You're actually shaking the family trees.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about that whole process of, obviously I think it's not a secret. You guys were watching these DNA databases that you could access, waiting for a relative to drop some DNA in there. Tell us about that whole thing and how that went down.
Well, there really isn't a way to sit there and watch the databases to see if there's a relative. The big issue with exploiting that type of technology is first generating the type of DNA profile that is compatible to search the databases. And there's been times over the years, I had been looking at, well, how can I search Ancestry to look for Ancestry.com to look for relatives of the Golden State Killer, or 23andMe, or MyHeritage, these various genealogy databases. And what you have to understand is that law enforcement crime labs do not produce a DNA profile that is compatible with that type of genealogy search. And the genealogy laboratories do not work with law enforcement to produce that type of profile, nor do they necessarily have the capability to work with forensic samples. I think a lot of people out there don't realize is the type of evidence we're dealing with. When we talk about, we've got DNA from the Golden State Killer. Well, what we've got is we've got a swab that was typically collected from the female victim that has the female's DNA and the offender's DNA mixed. That's a problem. If you were to take that sample and send it into a typical genealogy lab, they wouldn't know what to do with it because they don't know how to separate out the male DNA from the female DNA. So the big hurdle is trying to find DNA evidence in our case in which we could adequately separate the male DNA from the female DNA. We had enough of the DNA to be able to use this technology on and have a lab that would generate a genealogy type profile. There was multiple steps that were needed in order to get to that point. And so that was what I was working on. I started working on that probably April or May of last year in terms of identifying a suitable sample. I had consumed all the DNA in the Contra Costa County East Area rapist cases years ago, pursuing what's called the YSTR technology. That's the paternal DNA. It's inherited from father to son through the generations. And so 6 years ago, I was pursuing that genealogy work, and I had consumed all the DNA I had in my possession in order to get a good, extended 67 marker profile for the East Area rapist. But then now I'm looking at this new autosomal DNA technology that all the genealogy companies are now using, such as Ancestry and 23andMe, and I didn't have the DNA. So I had to convince somebody down in Southern California, where they still had Golden State Killer DNA, to basically allow me to take some of that valuable DNA and generate this genealogy profile to search the genealogy databases. That is the big hurdle, and that's what took so long. Public people from the public calling up and say, me and my wife were watching a show, and we both turned to each other and said, they should just search Ancestry.com. It's not that easy when you are dealing with a forensic sample. But once we got to where we could generate a genealogy-compatible DNA profile, then it was, what databases are we going to search? And the obvious one was the open-source public-facing database, GEDmatch. And that's what we did. I uploaded it into GEDmatch. I got a list of relatives, and then we started doing traditional genealogy to try to figure out if we could ultimately land on who the Golden State Killer was from that list.
So you had, in other words, when you put that DNA into that database, one of his relatives was already in the database. Is that correct?
Oh, multiple relatives. The way it works is that it's not like the FBI's CODA system where you're uploading the offender's DNA and you get a hit, a one-to-one hit. This is a genealogy match. So what you're doing is you're uploading the profile, and the genealogy website is searching for the people that share the most amount of DNA. So some people would share, let's say, 100 there's a unit of measurement called centimorgans, 100 centimorgans of DNA with your offender's DNA. And then there's another person that shares 95 centimorgans, and there's another person that shares 65 centimorgans. And it goes down in diminishing amounts. And the smaller the amount of DNA the person shares, the more distantly related they are. So for those of your listeners out there, if they've ever done their DNA through Ancestry, all of a sudden they're just getting peppered once they get the results back, and you've got 20 third cousins, and you've got 100 fourth cousins, and you've got 5,000, fifth cousins. So when you get the results back out of GEDmatch, searching the Golden State Killer's DNA, what we got was a list of individuals that the best match that we got was on the order of a third cousin. And we had roughly 15 to 20 third cousin level matches before we started dropping down into the lower level of fourth cousin or worse. So that's what we had to start with. There wasn't just a person. It was multiple people that were very, very distantly related. They're so distantly related, they don't even know that the person that's their relative DNA-wise is Joe D'Angelo even exists.
And from my understanding, once you weed through these people, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed like you had gotten down to D'Angelo and somebody else that you guys thought might be more of a possibility, but you had some stumbling blocks with him. Is that correct?
Right. We got down, and I'll say just roughly a handful of individuals, of males that kind of checked the boxes of being the right age, that were living in California in the 1970s, but only 2 were close enough to Sacramento. There was this one other individual that we focused on first, who's had 2 uncles that lived right in the heart of Cordova Meadows in 1975, 1976, where the East Area Rapists first started attacking. And because of that connection, and one of those uncles ultimately moved to Stockton and bought a house from the company that employed the second Stockton victim, that particular person that we were looking at rose to the top of the pile because there was a geographic connection with that person, their relatives, and what we knew about the Golden State Killer. But ultimately, we were able to eliminate that person, and that person has no idea they were even looked at as, maybe being associated with the Golden State Killer case. That's when we focused on D'Angelo, because he did have the Auburn connection. He was close enough. He was a little bit older than what most people thought, but we thought, well, he's at least in the Sacramento region at the right time frame, and we knew that he attended Folsom High School back in 1962, so it appeared that his family was down in the Rancho Cordova area, because those that were in Rancho Cordova were bused to Folsom High School during that time frame, that we thought, well, we need to start looking at him. And that's when I started reaching out and talking to people who knew him, and that as we got more information, that's when he became much more interesting.
And just to walk us through, so let's say you have an interest in him and you want to talk to people to get a better understanding. How do you go about talking to them without the information getting back to him that you're asking questions about him?
Well, that's part of the investigative strategy. You have to assess the relationship of the person you want to talk to and D'Angelo, what it was back in the day, and then what it is today. For example, everybody is aware of this Bonnie. We had a newspaper article that we found early on. D'Angelo had been engaged to a Bonnie back in 1970. And then, of course, if there's an engagement, then you'd expect to see a marriage license and, possibly children and everything else. But there was nothing. There was no indication that that couple had ever been married. You start investigating who Bonnie is, and you start seeing that she's remarried and has been married for a long time, and obviously there's no shared children with D'Angelo. You go, the chances that Bonnie and this Joe D'Angelo today, after more than 40 years of from that engagement, the chances of them being friendly with each other and in constant communication is low. It's not impossible, but it's low. So you have to roll the dice. And so I did. I rolled the dice, and I ended up calling Bonnie, left her a message, and unfortunately she was out of the country, and she never heard my message. But on the other side, his wife, Sharon, you start looking at that relationship and you recognize that, they have 3 children together. There's no divorce on record. You have 1 child that is living with him and 2 children that are living with her. There's a potential friendly relationship there. And there is no marriage. They were still married on paper. There was no relationships in between the time that you see the separation to the current date, and then you back away. I never contacted Sharon because of my fear that those 2 were still talking to each other. So it really is, you have to assess the circumstances back 40 years ago to the current day in order to determine how you want to approach somebody. And that's what I did. And, when I found that he was an Auburn PD officer, the logical thing is to call up Auburn PD and say, hey, do you have any personnel records? And then one thing led to another, and next thing I know, I'm talking to the former chief of police who fired D'Angelo, and then talking to him, he goes, I remember him well. I was his sergeant and when he was in patrol, and he told me all sorts of stuff that just notched D'Angelo up as being a much more interesting person as the Golden State Killer suspect than what we knew previously.
And you mentioned both Bonnie and his estranged wife. Do you know, have either of them talked to investigators at all?
The only thing I can say to that is that they have been contacted and spoken with, but I can't relay any information as to what they have said.
Okay. That's fair enough. And I'm sure if their stories come out, they're going to be very interesting to hear what they have to say. So did you have any kind of interactions with D'Angelo before he was actually arrested?
No. The closest that I came is, the last day before I retired, I drove up and parked in front of his house, and he was interesting enough where I needed to start doing what I typically do when I have what I call a prime suspect, where I start really digging into somebody. And so I wanted to see where he was living, see if I could see him out, in the yard or what was going on around his house. But I didn't have enough. I wasn't thinking he's the guy at the time. He was just an interesting individual. And even considered that, I should probably just go up and knock on this guy's door. What's the likelihood that he is really the Golden State Killer? It's, you get so jaded after having so many prime suspects being eliminated by DNA. You almost let your guard down, and that's kind of what I did. I really got to a point where I thought I was going to go and just say, what I've done many times. Hey, this is who I am. I'm looking into an old case. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions? And once I establish a rapport with the person, do you mind if, I get your DNA sample? That way, once you're eliminated, you don't have to worry about anybody, ever contacting you again on this case. And most people readily agree to providing a DNA sample. But I backed away from that because I realized I just didn't know enough at that point in time. It was too early. I thought, I might be pressing. I'm going to be retiring in a day. I don't want to, just let the fact that my job was ending was going to just, cause me to make a rash decision. And that's when I, put the car in drive and drove away.
That had to be a tough moment for you.
Well, you drive, from that at that time of day, I just drove straight home, and during the drive, I am, just beating myself up, going, maybe I should just go talk to that guy. Maybe not. I could help the investigation if I get his DNA, because then we could see, are we closer from the genealogy standpoint with D'Angelo, and then we would know that we were, in the right family branch of the genealogy work, and I thought, I should do that, but just never turn the car around to go get that done. And in retrospect, that really turned out to be the right decision.
Well, and although you were retired, I've heard that you were still part of the the team that was aware of what
Yes.
was going on. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. No, even though I retired, the small team, we had a handful of guys and women that were helping us. You had Steve Kramer and Melissa Parasote out of FBI Orange County, Kirk Campbell and Monica Tchaikovsky out of SAC DA's office, myself, and then an external expert who has opted not to have their name out in the public domain at this point in time. This team, we knew we were close at this point. And so, fortunately, the guys that were still active embraced me as a retiree to basically, it was a seamless transition. My email address, changed from a ContraCostaCounty.org type email address to a gmail.com email address, but we were still emailing back and forth like nothing had changed. We were still talking to each other on the phone like nothing had changed. So my role really did not change, even though I just was not going down to Martinez, California and sitting in my, district attorney's office. I was sitting at home, or I was actually out of state trying to buy a house in the state that we're moving to, and talking to them on the phone and continuing to move forward with the strategy.
So when they bring this guy in, you finally get to see him. You get to sit in on some of the interrogations, or questioning might be a better word. But what was your first take on him?
Well, first, I was never in the interview room with him. The way things worked out is he was brought in. Sacramento Sheriff's homicide detective Ken Clark was the primary interviewer of him initially. Ken and I were supposed to go in and talk to him about the Central Valley and East Area rapist attacks before Southern California agencies who had homicides were to take their turn. And I can't get into specifics, but the way that the interview worked out and how he responded, basically we had to skip the sexual assaults in Northern California that couldn't be prosecuted to get the investigators with homicides in there sooner than later. So I did not get a chance to sit in the same room with D'Angelo and talk to him. But I watched through the monitor 7 hours of him being interviewed. So I do have a good feel on how he responded to the various people that were talking to him, and how he answered, or I should say didn't answer for the most part, any of the questions that they were asking him.
And, obviously there's a lot of stuff that's out there, speculation, rumors, and I don't know that you can confirm any of it or whatever, but to your knowledge, has he confirmed anything or admitted to anything, or is that something you don't know or can't say?
To my knowledge, he has not admitted to anything.
Well, that's something personally that I always thought he would take the coward's way out and just not own up to anything. So that doesn't surprise me. But, how about you as far as being surprised? You told us that he wasn't the troll under the bridge that he was pretending to be, and it seems like you were right about that. How surprised were you that he was an ex-cop and he's a a grandfather and owns a house right there and has a nice lawn. How much of that was a surprise to you?
I wouldn't say any of that was surprising. The fact that he was a law enforcement officer, it's not surprising, though I will say that when I was evaluating the case, this guy being a law enforcement officer was something that would come up from time to time over the course of, the 1970s to the current day. And I took the position that, this guy is an intelligent offender. He is somebody that would naturally do some of the things that we are seeing because he's all about self-preservation. It doesn't mean he has law enforcement training. And now we know D'Angelo was a law enforcement officer, then, of course, now you see, okay, this guy did have law enforcement training, and he capitalized on that training to do the things that he was doing. But he was doing other things that you generally don't learn in law enforcement. It again speaks to D'Angelo as a sophisticated and an intelligent offender who also learned from his mistakes. And he adjusted his MO to suit the situation and continuously improved upon his abilities to avoid capture.
Oh. And, one thing that, we talked about a little bit last time we talked was the Visalia ransacker connection. How surprised were you that it's likely that he was, after all that, the ransacker?
That's one of those things where with Visalia ransacker, I took the position that I did not think that the East Area Rapist and the Visalia ransacker were the same person. Now, I'm not surprised that they were, and I do think after, circumstantially that, D'Angelo is likely the Visalia ransacker, though it still needs to be proven. But I do think that that's what it's looking like. And it's not surprising. It's more of, God, how did he change his physical appearance and his skill sets and even his behaviors in those 6 months from when he shot Officer McGowan to when he's showing up and becoming the East Area Rapist? And this is where, from evaluating the series, and this is getting into that academic mode, what you're looking at, again, it speaks to this guy's intelligence. He's recognizing his faults as the Visalia ransacker. He was not good at getting inside houses. He often would pry or attempt to pry multiple windows and multiple doors before getting in. He was not good at staying hidden. Multiple people in that town saw him. What turns out to be spot-on composites were generated. When he leaves Visalia, he recognizes he made mistakes, and now he is modifying his skill sets. He is modifying his MO, and he's even modifying his behaviors with the victims in order to prevent his mistakes from Visalia from occurring again. So it is very interesting to watch the evolution of an intelligent offender who does have elevated skill sets as a result of his law enforcement training and how he adjusts in order to be able to continue to offend, to continue to satisfy those compulsions that he had. You would think the average person with the scares down in Visalia would say, I'm done. They got too close to me, and they wouldn't continue. Well, he just got better as a result because he wanted to continue.
And it appears also that, that 6-month period when he reappears in Rancho Cordova, it seems like he's gone, through a physical transformation as well.
Yep.
And, he's gone from primarily being a home burglar and prowler to a full-fledged rapist. I mean, how unusual was that to see that kind of huge transformation physically and, transitioning from a burglar to a rapist that quickly?
Well, I do believe that he purposely physically transformed himself. Again, he was seen as a Visalia ransacker, and he is described as, kind of this heavier set, rounded shoulder, thick hip, thick thigh, thick calf, had thick calves, short fat feet, very pudgy round face, to all of a sudden having a slim athletic build 6 months later. I was thinking, well, maybe he went through the academy where he's doing a lot of physical fitness, he's burning a lot of calories, but at least as of right now, with the records that I've seen, that's not the case. He did the academy way back in 1974, and when he transfers up to Auburn PD, he's just taking classroom training. He's not actually doing any physical training. So I believe that he recognized that he had been seen, a composite showing him how he looked heavier was out there, and he decided, I've got to lose weight in order to help hide my identity. In addition, he takes additional steps. He's making sure he always has a ski mask on. He's making sure he's blinding these victims with a flashlight. And even with taking those two steps, when he's inside the house dealing with the victims, he's telling them, don't look at me or I'll kill you, even though he's got a ski mask on. So he is taking it many steps down the road of preserving his identity, because he knows that he sucked at preserving his identity as the Visalia ransacker.
Wow. And as far as the homework, now obviously that's takes on a new light, because now you can actually go back and find samples of his handwriting and compare it. You've always felt that homework was definitely dropped by the East Area Rapist. Do you still think that's the case now, and what does that do to the, you had a theory that it might be related to home development and stuff. Do you think any
right.
or all of that homework is his?
At this point in time, I still think it's possibly related, though my confidence is not as high as it used to be. I was inside D'Angelo's house and walked through his house, and I saw numerous examples of his writing. I even saw a hand-drawn diagram that he had generated. And after observing that, I walked away going, okay, I can see enough overlap between what was present in his house and the homework evidence where I think it's still in play. We don't know enough about D'Angelo at this point in time. He most certainly is going through school. The homework evidence, the two essays, appeared to be school assignments. So I'm very interested to see, what coursework besides criminal justice did he take when he was at Sierra College or when he was at Sac State. The hand-drawn diagram, I think, is a bit more perplexing. And I've said that I see evidence that there's a collaboration between two people with what's going on in the markings in that homework evidence. It's possible that you have another individual that is drawing that diagram and is talking to D'Angelo about that. But I don't know. It's speculation at this time. Did he take drafting or landscape architecture at Sierra College or Sac State, and this was merely a homework assignment? The experts that I put that diagram in front of are pointing out industry-specific symbols that generally practitioners would use, not something that you would learn in a classroom. So that's where I've always leaned towards. This is somebody who's actually out at the job site. What's really resonated with me since D'Angelo was identified is I had a guy online who had been in law enforcement for 45 years say, hey, back in the day, we used to moonlight as security guards on construction job sites in order to, make, a little bit more money because we weren't paid very good back in the day. And when you look at the prevalence of where this guy is attacking, especially after he moves out of Sacramento, You know, when he gets into Stockton, when he's in Davis, even Modesto, and out in the East Bay and Concord, even down in Danville, Fremont, and San Jose, he is attacking either in or immediately adjacent to active construction. And so when I see that pattern, then that's where a job site security guard makes sense to me. Now, why would a security guard have that hand-drawn diagram? I can't really answer that at this point in time. And so I'm really interested to find out, is there a reason for him to have drawn that himself, either through classroom training or through maybe, you know, interactions with people who were in the development building industry, or, you know, was I spinning my wheels following a red herring for several years, you know, diving down on that diagram? I just don't know at this point.
And so after all this, after the arrest, obviously there's, you know, either going to be a plea deal or a trial, whatever is going to be coming. But, you know, I assume this is the biggest case of your career. How does it feel to you know, solve it and get this off of your back so you can sort of move out on
it? You know, I am starting to feel I'm feeling good that the case is solved. There's still sort of an uneasy feeling because I have so many unanswered questions about who this guy was, and I want those questions answered just in my mind so I can better understand this offender and how he committed these crimes. But, you know, another part of it is I have been so busy since we announced D'Angelo as the Golden State Killer. I still to this day haven't really been able to just sit back, push away, and start contemplating the magnitude of the closure to this case.
And there are, you know, a couple of people that have asked questions, so I've got a few questions for you, and
Sure.
Hopefully you can answer these. If you can't, then we'll skip by them. But obviously you've seen him in court. What did you think of his first court appearance where he could barely talk or sit up?
You know, that was all an act. We know, you know, he was under surveillance for a week, and he was directly observed to be very physically capable, very physically mobile. He, you know, is riding a motorcycle at high rates of speed down the freeway. He's moving around his house. He is doing mechanical work on his daughter's car and making trips to an auto parts store. He is getting around. The guys that directly observed him while he was under surveillance were saying, this guy does not move around like a 72-year-old. He's moving around like a 50-year-old. So seeing him get wheeled into court in a wheelchair, to me, you know, it was a bunch of BS. I saw his wheels spinning, sitting in that interview room, and him starting to implement a strategy. This guy is a tactician, and he was all about self-preservation when he was out there committing his attacks. And now that he's caught, once the shock of, oh my God, they caught me, wore off, he is now in that mode of how can I minimize the impact to me of being in this situation. And I believe that wheelchair and kind of being the feeble old man he was trying to get sympathy from the court and setting up a strategy for a defense down the road. He is thinking ahead in doing that.
And trying to play the sympathy card of the little old guy in the wheelchair.
Yep, absolutely.
And a couple, these seem like they could be minor questions, but I don't think anybody's had a real clear answer. Do you know, obviously there was evidence that the ransacker and East Area rapist may have been left-handed. Do you know if he's left-handed?
You know, I don't know for sure. The the one thing that caught my eye leading up to DeAngelo's arrest is the newspaper photograph in 1979 with him on the baseball field holding the baseball bat. And if you look at that photo, you can see the hint of a holster on his left hip. But I can't say that's a holster. It's not clear enough. But if it is, anybody's going to put their gun on their strong arm side. So that would suggest he's left-handed. But I don't have any direct observation of what hand is dominant for him. I know the active investigators right now know whether he's left-handed or right-handed. I just don't know.
Okay. And do you know if he's missing a finger?
He, when he was in the military, he was on a ship in the Navy over in Vietnam, and there was an accident in which he lost the tips of a couple of fingers and received a military disability as a result. So, yes, he is missing parts of a couple of fingers, but I have not directly observed that myself. When I was watching him in the interview room, I could never see his hands clear enough to verify that.
Yeah, because I thought it was interesting because I had seen an article in which his brother lost a finger. I was thinking,
yes.
How many brothers have lost fingers? And it seemed almost like he might have been using a story of what happened to his brother to cover what happened to his finger. But that's good.
Well, and that's something that I've speculated about, and this is speculation, because when you start to see, the two brothers both missing fingers or parts of fingers, you got to wonder, is there more to the story? Is there maybe an abusive situation with mom or dad, in terms of punishment as they're being, they're growing up, and extreme corporal punishment where now you have, fingers being damaged or parts of them being taken off. But I would think for something like with Joe DeAngelo, he's going into the military, and you have military records indicating this accident occurred, that seems legit. That was something that occurred on duty in the military versus something that occurred earlier in life, and he just kind of hid it and then used it to his advantage to get a disability.
And have you guys been able, or you personally, were you able to establish any timeline for him between 1986 and 1996?
No. As far as I know, the reality is we don't have a timeline for him between 1979 and 1986, which are the critical years for the homicides. We know he's terminated from Auburn PD in August of 79 for the shoplifting of dog repellent and a hammer. And then in October of 79, he is in court and is convicted of that crime. In October of 79, he's down in Goleta, Santa Barbara for the first attack down south that goes sideways on him. He doesn't kill anybody in that attack. But then 2 months later, he's 2 blocks away, essentially, and kills Dr. Offerman and Dr. Manning. Why is he down in Santa Barbara so soon after the conviction up in Sacramento? That's a mystery. And then why is he down in Southern California at all between 79 and 86? We know he bought a gun in Whittier in 1986. We know one of his daughters was born in Los Angeles County in 1986. But I don't know why he's down there. I don't know what kind of job he has down there. So it is a big mystery. It's a hole in the investigation, and the current investigators, I know, are trying to fill that hole in.
And you personally, do you think there's other murder victims out there?
I don't, on a personal level. There's always that possibility. But considering the type of crime that he did, going inside middle class to middle upper class houses, these would be high priority crimes that would come to the attention of any law enforcement agency that would be investigating that type of crime. So in all likelihood, that type of victimology would have caused those cases to have been worked and any DNA evidence to have been put up into CODIS, and we would have made a link. With that being said, it is possible. I can't eliminate it. But I really think that after Gregory Sanchez got into a physical fight with this guy, that this guy walked away from that crime scene scared. And that's why he doesn't offend for 5 years. And then he runs across pretty Janelle Cruz in 1986. He can't help himself. And I think it's significant that there is no male present inside that house. So it's safe for him. He doesn't have a Gregory Sanchez to have to deal with when he's dealing with Janelle Cruz. So he ends up going in and kills Janelle Cruz. And at that point in time, he is 41 years old. This is now getting old for this type of serial predator. And that's when their frequency of their cases do diminish as they age. So I do believe it is entirely possible. We don't have any cases after Janelle Cruz in 1986.
And how good does it feel to see that other, agencies are putting some of their DNA into, the same database like you guys did, sort of learning or following you guys, and already getting results? There's a Washington case that was just solved. How good is that to see that same technology that you guys employed possibly leading to other crimes being solved?
Yeah, that's actually a very awesome feeling because, the technology and the strategy that I used, I didn't develop that. I can't take credit for being the one that said, this is how we can do it. I initiated the process in the Golden State Killer series, and the team drove it forward. So my credit is recognizing that process would work. But the one thing that I would say that I did do is kind of throw caution to the wind, because even going into doing that technology, I knew it would be controversial. And I experienced that firsthand within the investigation to a point, and I can't get into details on that, and decided to charge forward with it. And now seeing that I basically took the ball and ran with it has given these other agencies the opportunity to move forward with it and start solving cases. That feels great because, I've sort of been the face, the poster child of the guy that's violated everybody's privacy rights across the United States with this genealogy thing. And I don't think that's reality, but I'm willing to take that criticism on in order to be able to get this tool to be used for law enforcement to solve these kinds of cases.
Oh, that's awesome. And so I have one final question of my own, and it has nothing to do with the case. You recently started a Twitter account with the handle @PaulHoles. Congrats, by the way. You got like an instant 10,000 followers, which is rock star status. But speaking of rock star, you mentioned on Twitter that you're into some 80s rock. I know you like Ozzy. I happen to know that you have a guitar, and I just want to know, do you play that guitar? And
I do.
You play us a song on the air.
Right now, all of my guitars that I play have been packed up and are out of state. So I have not played guitar for a couple of months. And would I play on air? I am nowhere near good enough to play on air. I like to sit in the corner and bang. I do that on guitar, and I do that on the drum set, and it's just sort of a stress relief, but I have no talent whatsoever.
What do you play, a little Crazy Train or something?
Oh, yeah. No, I've tried to learn Crazy Train from beginning to end, including the solo, and it's pretty ugly. A wide variety. I learned the guitar initially learning classical guitar, on a typical, the gut string acoustic guitar, and then moved on to electric guitar because I was into the hard rock back in the day. And now with the amount of material online on how to learn these songs that I love listening to, it's been great. And, maybe someday I'll get good enough to where I can play, for somebody, but right now it is a very private thing.
Yeah, I didn't really think you would say, play one, but I just figured I'd ask just in case. But so I think it's safe to say that we'll see a lot from you in the future, but probably not you performing any live concerts.
No, that is very safe to say. I hope to be able to contribute to law enforcement and to the TV and to the podcast moving forward, but you will not see me on stage with a guitar strapped around my neck. That is not going to happen.
That's a letdown. So where can people find you? What do you got coming up in the future, in the near future, where people can find you and see what you're doing?
Really right now, I am still in the process of trying to figure out what I'm going to do. I'm in conversations with numerous media outlets that have interest in using me in different capacities. And once I settle in on that, I will let everybody know that that's what's going on. I do have a Twitter account at Paul Holes. And I'm not the most active Twitter person, but I'm trying to jump on that every day and respond to people's questions and try to put some of the issues that I have a passion about out there. So if anybody wants to follow me, you'll get information. Some of the cases I've worked, and if I do have any information that I get a clear direction on what my future is in terms of who I'm going with to get a book published, or what TV show I might be involved with, what next podcast I'm on. I'm going to try to put that out on the Twitter account.
And people can just go on there and talk a little bit of 80s rock music with you, too.
They definitely can, but I don't want to be stereotyped as just an 80s rock guy. I listen to music, from the 70s all the way up to current day. So I have all sorts of. I have a much more varied interest and diversified interest than just 80s hard rock. But that's my core. That's when I graduated high school, and I think in high school the music you listen to kind of sticks with you, throughout the rest of your life.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. Well, I definitely appreciate you coming on, Paul. We appreciate your time. We know you're busy, and we were just happy to get this interview while we could with you.
Well, for you, Mike, anytime.
I appreciate it. All right, let me just stop recording, Paul.